And welcome to Jacksonville, Tiya. It's such an honor to speak with you today. So we'll just go ahead and get started from the very beginnings. Why are you a writer?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Tammy, for that warm welcome. It's a pleasure to be here for the first time. It's my first visit. Thank you all for coming. Thanks to the familiar faces who I saw earlier today at our craft lab, our writing workshops. Good to see you again. So, Tammy, I know that you teach writing among many other things. And so I don't want to start off by suggesting that writing and the desire to write cannot be taught. I believe they can be taught. Mm-hmm. But I also have an inkling that there are people on this earth who were kind of born with the writing bug, born with the writing switch, mm-hmm. who were meant to be storytellers of some kind. So my grandmother's one of these people, and she's just my beloved. I adore my grandmother, who has now passed on for many years, but she seemed to be a natural storyteller. Mm-hmm. She couldn't answer a question without telling a story about it. And it was okay. We were eager, all of us, I was, my cousins, to hear what it is that she said. And I think that kind of an impulse, that desire, some people just, it comes with the package. And I'm one of them, for better or for worse, because sometimes it can be very frustrating.
Yeah, I was going to ask a follow-up to that, like in terms of the profession of writing, the craft of writing, what are some of the attractions and the difficulties? Because there's probably, surely both.
I think expressive creativity is probably one of the biggest attractions. It seems to me that just as people, we want to make things, we want to create things, we want to express ourselves, we want to put a little of ourselves out into the world, and writing is one way to do that. There are lots of other creative endeavors that people can get involved with, but writing is one of them. And it's such a pleasure sometimes to do this work. But I have a colleague and a friend, her name is Barbara Savage, and she's a historian, and she just wrote a big biography on a Black woman intellectual and diplomat named Merce Tate. And one of the things that Barbara Savage says in this biography is that we don't often let ourselves realize that intellectual work and, writing, that it's actually pleasurable. Mm-hmm. There is an enjoyment, there's a satisfaction that comes with having a problem and trying to sort it out, especially by writing through it. And there's a satisfaction and a pleasure in arranging words on a page in a way that you hope will carry meaning or carry beauty or move someone. So I think that's the best thing mm-hmm. about it. The second best thing about it is being able to have people who might read what you write, whether that be a teacher in your classroom or people who read your work online, or people who will grab the book of yours from the library and who reach out and connect and say, this really moved me. This meant something to me. That's one of the greatest pleasures in the world, mm-hmm. to feel like something you wrote could matter.
Yeah. Okay. And in terms of the difficulties?
I know, I was going to say, am I going to be able to get away without answering that part? I think writing is really, really hard. And I see nods, so lots of people in this space right now. It is hard. I mean, when we see somebody with a published book, I think we sometimes feel like, oh, wow, they snapped and that book happened. That it was sort of like magic. Or if they've done a couple books, it becomes old hat. Now they just, sit down at the desk and next month they're publishing a book. I struggle with every single book I write. Mm-hmm. It is so hard. It is so hard to, sometimes for people just to find the right topic. Our students struggle with trying to find a topic, right? It's hard to do the research. It's hard to know when you've done enough research. It's hard to organize your thinking. It's hard to know if you have anything to say. It's hard to arrive at an argument. It's hard to write in a way that you feel like you are clearly or plainly expressing your thoughts, but also getting to a higher level of complexity. It takes a ton of time. It takes a ton of revision. It takes a ton of hearing feedback that isn't always like, oh, I love what you just wrote. Sometimes feedback is like, you need to go and seriously rewrite this. It's in some ways it's like a grueling practice, or it's a grueling craft, and you have to kind of just lock yourself, into the room to get it done. But there's a deep satisfaction in making progress, and then in the end being able to share it with other people.
Beautiful. Yeah. As you were saying that, and I think you referenced your grandmother as being a natural storyteller. Was there a moment when, I know you said like there's a sense that it is innate to you, but could you maybe pinpoint a moment when that, because it seems like you're talking almost like a calling, or was there a moment you associate with an awareness that would be your life?
I think calling is the right word. And I think a lot of people share this. Many people that I know, friends and colleagues, who write in various capacities, share a similar kind of experience of it just being the thing they had to do. They just were born to tell stories. I think many of us, maybe there's a tribe of storytellers. I first realized that I wanted to be a writer when I was in grade school. And it came to me, some of you heard this earlier today, it came to me as an assignment in a classroom when my fifth grade teacher said, we're all going to write books of poetry. And she basically opened the door to being able to just imagine myself as somebody who could write and who could be a writer. And after that, and this is new information to the people who attended the workshop, I wrote a play for my recreation center. This is where we would go after school. And they let me do it. There was no plan. It wasn't a class or anything. They just let me write the play. And these wonderful counselors at this recreation center basically got a crew of kids together, and we put on the play. We put on this play. And it had a very silly name, which was Super Duper Sam. But it was just such an amazing feeling.
Yeah.
To be able to bring something from your imagination or your mind to put it out, and then to engage in it with other people. So I would say that's when grade school was when I first realized I wanted to be a writer.
Oh, wonderful. As you were talking, I keyed in on that term imagination and the gift that teacher gave you. And as I was looking over your body of work, I could associate yours as seeming to be an unfettered imagination, because you write nonfiction, fiction, articles, essays. You have a Substack. Do you have a favorite genre?
Well, first, I have to give props to one of my dissertation advisors. His name is David Roediger. He is an historian of the United States and labor and race. And when I was writing my dissertation, he was out of the country somewhere, but he wrote me a letter, which took a very, very long time to reach me. And I still have this letter pegged to my bulletin board. And he wrote in it, be as freewheeling as you want to be. Because as my teacher and my reader, he saw me trying to kind of button myself up and trying to write like a historian, whatever that meant. And his message to me was, no, it's okay. Be free, be open, be creative with it. And then part of the task is to try to identify where those points of freedom and experimentation work and where they don't work. And then remove some, or maybe add more and go in different kinds of directions with the revision. So maybe that's a way for me to come in sideways and answer it by saying, I don't know if I could exactly pick a genre, because I try to mix them. I try to blend them. So I've written one novel so far, and that novel is based on 2 or 3 books and many years of research. And with each history I write, I try to see if I can be a little more freewheeling, kind of push the boundaries a little bit more in creativity and expressivity, and also in trying to expand the different elements of meaning that we could get from engaging with history. So for me, writing history is not just about what happened in the past or what changed over time. It's about the meaning that we make of it.
Okay. Now, this is a related question, and you may have already hit on it, but what would you characterize the differences in writing history versus fiction? Like, do you feel different when you're working on a book of history as opposed to a fiction work?
Yeah. This is such an interesting question because I think the border between history and fiction is not so clear-cut as we might like to think. I mean, they both are imaginative practices. They both require somebody to create a narrative or an order of events that they're going to be kind of explaining. And they both have arguments of some kind. I think in fiction, the arguments may be a little bit hidden, but there's an argument in there. Like even in romance novels, I see some nods. That's cool. I'm the romance reader too. I have been for a long time. My mom loves romance, so she reads romances like once a day. Not that I said that wrong. That sounds too small. Not once a day. I mean one novel a day. But even in romance novels, which is a very accessible, very popular genre, I think there is an argument, which is that love is real, love can happen, we can have hope. So there's not such a strict boundary between history and fiction, but there are different expectations and requirements for those forms. And while I did take plenty of creative writing classes in college, and I did take fiction writing classes and workshops, and had a long time interest in this, I really was trained in academic writing as a doctoral student. So by the time I started publishing, I had a very strong foundation in, writing the historical argument, supporting it with evidence, building the whole infrastructure of the thing is that you're trying to make the case for. And it was, I think, was it two books in? I think I'd written 2 books when I decided to write a novel. And I found myself being just really hemmed in, just really stumped, because my imagination, it was still back in the classroom. And I found myself telling myself, you can't write that. It didn't really happen. It was really hard to cross over the line and realize, wait, this is fiction. Anything can happen. You can write anything. But in my novel, I ended up needing to have a crutch. So the crutch that I created was I went back to an actual set of diaries, missionary diaries, that I also mentioned earlier today. That was a very important source. These are Moravian missionary diaries. The Moravians wrote nonstop. And I tried to reproduce a diary, but from a fictional perspective. I had to kind of trick myself into writing fiction. And after I managed the trick, I felt really satisfied that I'd had the chance to do it, because the novel allowed me to get into spaces and get into emotional territory that I just could not do in my histories that were covering the same topic, which was about slavery in the Cherokee Nation. Because in a history, you need the evidence. And in my histories, if I suspected something or thought I knew something, I didn't feel that I could say that unless I had the evidence, unless I could back it up. But in the novel, I could say what I wanted to say. And that was a really liberating kind of feeling.
And I love it in all that she carried. We were talking about this earlier in the back. As I was reading the rich historical record of Charleston, South Carolina, and then I'd be reading about these, slave manifests and all these historical artifacts, and then there'd be a quotation from Alice Walker or a reference to Bluest Eye. And so I see that kind of weaving together in those kind of critical historical spaces that are left as gaps, and how Black women writers in particular seems to work. Could you talk a little bit about the impact that Black women writers of fiction as well as historical academic writers have had on your work?
Yeah, I would love to. I love that question. And I'm very glad that you felt that way about those quotations or those examples and all that she carried. I should tell people that All That She Carried is a book about a family of enslaved Black women who experienced a tragic event when the daughter of the family, whose name was Ashley, was sold away from her mother, whose name was Rose, and Ashley was 9 years old. The family passed down this story for generations, and a granddaughter, a descendant in the family, embroidered the family story onto a cotton sack, which is now known as Ashley sack. And that sack has been exhibited at multiple museums. It's been in the Smithsonian. Right now it's in the International African American Museum down in Charleston. So that's what this book is about. This is a book that I wanted to write in a different way. And one of the things that I was hoping to do with it, which you've just affirmed for me, that maybe it happened, and I'm so happy. No one else has said quite that exact thing, Tammy, about this book. So I'm very grateful to you for saying that. I wanted to tuck little surprises or little moments of light into this book because the story is just so heavy. It's a heart-crushing story. And one way for me to do that was to put in these moments. I think of it almost like, if you could imagine, I don't know, like a pond with lily pads. Like it's just a moment of respite, a moment of brightness in the depth, or kind of in the darkness of the story. So I do that partly with bringing in some of these Black women writers who, for me in my own life, were moments of light, who helped me to understand something about who I was in the world and who people like me were in the world, who my grandmother was in the world. And because this was maybe my sixth book, I think it was somewhere around there, I felt like I had gained a little more room for greater experimentation. And if you allow me an aside here, I want to share that in my first book, which is called Ties That Bind, and which traces the history of a Black Cherokee family in the Cherokee Nation. This is a family in which the Black members were enslaved by the Cherokee members. In that first book, I have a section where I turn to Toni Morrison's novel, Beloved, to try to explain what an atrocity slavery really was. And I felt that I couldn't go to history for that, for the reasons that I was saying earlier. I felt that I had to go to literature for that. So there's a moment in that book where I do that. And I've heard from some colleagues that when that book is taught in graduate seminars and history departments, that there's often a debate. That she used fiction. Was this okay? How did she use fiction? Should she use fiction? Or, what are our concerns about her using fiction? So this was actually an issue when that book came out, and I think that was around 2005-ish. But now, several books later, with All That She Carried, I felt like, okay, I did that. I took the hits if there were going to be some hits around that. And it's no holds barred. I'm going to put Alice Walker anywhere. I'm going to, really integrate these contemporary Black women's voices, contemporary Black women's literature, theories into a book about the past.
Oh, beautiful. Thinking about the past and the present, contemporary voices, what is it like to be a scholar and writer of racial and gender issues in today's political environment? What have you been navigating? What have you found?
All right. So I'm going to start answering this question by maybe finding a safe way in. Thank you. You're right. There's no safe way in. You're right. You're just laughing at me. But my most recent book is called Night Flyer. It's a biography of Harriet Tubman that looks at her life through especially ecology and faith. And this title has been in my head a lot lately. this title is meant to capture the way in which Harriet Tubman operated, which is in the dark. When she was escaping herself, trying to help other people to escape from their enslavement, she would move at night. She would move in the winter. She would move at times when she knew most people were not going to be looking for her or looking for them. And when she was on the move, she tried to tap into what she felt was her higher source of strength or power. The flyer part in the title references that she had a recurring dream, imagining herself as a bird, and her dreams were often spiritual dreams in her mind. So I think about this a lot, about how sometimes you get into a situation or a moment where it is wise to identify what are the safest, most effective ways that you can operate. And sometimes those safe, most effective ways are in the dark, at night, under the radar. And in difficult times like these, it seems necessary to be able to tap into something that's not all this, because we are surrounded by so much ugliness right now. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of fear. I teach at Harvard University, and our university has been in the sights of this federal government. There is just a palpable sense of worry and concern. And people have been scared, and people are still scared, especially international students. I won't go into all that. Some of you probably have read about it, or if you haven't, you can just Google it. But Harriet Tubman's story does give me just a feeling of being more anchored while living in a context of uncertainty or even threat, or when people are afraid, because that was her whole life. That was the life she was born into. That was her family's life. That was her parents' life. That was her grandmother's life. And she didn't stop. So I feel like it's important for us to be straightforward and honest. I am afraid. I'm afraid in a lot of ways right now. I have colleagues who have now stopped spelling out certain people's names, and I feel like we're in the land of Harry Potter when Voldemort's name can't be spoken. Yeah. You all know that. I see. So that's the Harry Potter series. Voldemort, what is he? Oh, the Dark Wizard. His name. He's called He Who Shall Not Be Named. So I have colleagues now who will not spell out a name, and I feel like I'm doing it right now. They will not write a name in their emails because they know that our emails are being, watched. They know that our emails have been requested by governmental agencies and are being read, and they don't want to put big red flags and things. I have colleagues who have scrubbed their websites, who have gone through and thought, like, what on my personal website might suggest that I am engaged in and involved in any of these things, even and including teaching Black history. Yeah. And I will tell you that I actually went back to a class that I've taught previously and revised my course description, because our course descriptions are all public, and we have been told that there are organizations that are reading our course descriptions to try to create more havoc. So I don't know. Now I've forgotten your question because I'm getting really caught up in the.
But it's just this moment, right?
It is really hard. Yeah. But I feel like if we look to the figures who came before us, whom we admire, that we can see how just being quiet and doing nothing is not the way, right? Yeah. I mean, if people had been quiet and done nothing, I venture to guess you and I would not be sitting here. Yeah. Be able to have this conversation.
Right. Your silence will not save you. Yeah. But along those lines, as you point to those people who've come before and they've done this work and they've left a roadmap for us. I love the breadth of your historical research. You mentioned your first research. And I would like you to, if you wouldn't mind sharing with us some of your insight into slavery and race in the Cherokee nations and in Native American nations, because, most African Americans claim that Cherokee grandmother.
Yes, they do. They do indeed. My own grandmother would claim a Cherokee grandmother. Okay, stress on the word claim. As I said, love her to death.
Yeah.
But sometimes our wires can get crossed around history and mythology. Let's just put it like that. No disrespect to my dear grandmother. But that's part of the reason why I started doing my early research as a graduate student, is because my grandmother had always said that she and her family had, Indian, that was the term that she would use, ancestry. And she would say that her father lived to be over 100, and his eyesight was like an eagle's, and that's because of the Indian ancestry. She said that when Black people ran away from slavery, they would be taken in by the Indians. She had all these stories that she would love to tell us sitting on the front porch. I thought, this is like a really interesting thing to pursue. Let me look into this in graduate school. And so I did.
Knowledge is power.
Okay. Knowledge is power. That'll be our mantra. Knowledge is power. Okay. So I started doing this research, and what I found was that the biggest point of connection between Black people and Native people in the South was actually Native people enslaving Black people.
Ouch.
Yeah. But I'm trying to remember what you said. Knowledge is power. And so I didn't turn away from the topic. I stuck with that topic, and there were some really hard realizations in doing that research. Part of them having to do with my grandmother's story and her belief about it, with many Black people's investment in this idea, which to me, in thinking it through, really pointed to a sense of forlornness or lack of belonging on this landscape. I mean, if you can claim a connection to Indigenous peoples, then you maybe can claim more of a right to be in a place and to call that place home. There's a deep need and desire for that among African Americans, I felt. But I also ran into difficult moments of knowledge when I learned about the continuing racism on the part of some Southern Indigenous nations, the continuing anti-Black prejudice, even into the day when I was working on that research. One of the most striking things that happened in my early work, which I never forgot, was when a scholar came to visit my graduate seminar in Native American history, and he was talking about his work doing research on the Catawba Nation of Carolina at the time. He was South Carolina now. And he talked about how contemporary people, when he was doing the work, this is now decades ago, in the Catawba Nation, told him that they really appreciated his research and they wanted him to publish it, except for the part about the Black people. Because he had found in his research that there had been a time in the 1700s-ish, into right around 1800, when Catawbas and African-descended people had traded, traded goods, items, worked together, lived together, married, had children, been in communities together. But that tide turned, and the Catawba people wanted to separate themselves from Black people, and as racism got harder and harder, it hardened, they wanted to forget that past. So when I heard that, I just felt like, oh my, this was just so sad. I mean, there were so many moments of extreme sadness in this work. But what I will say is that was in the 1990s. And there have been many people doing this kind of research over the years who have been going to the primary sources, who've been publishing their work, who've been sharing evidence of these relationships. And that research matters. Putting these stories out matters. And these tribal nations, some of them, have been reconsidering their understandings about that history and their relationships with the descendants of people who had been enslaved in their nations. And the biggest, most positive example we have of that right now is in the Cherokee Nation, which decided to include the descendants of freed people as citizens. They now have descendants of freed people. By that, I mean formerly enslaved people. They now have individuals in that group as part of their national government. And just recently, I learned that they're doing a whole documentary. The Cherokee Nation is doing a whole documentary on this category, which is historically known as freedmen. It's women too, but freedmen and freed women. So enslaved people and their descendants. The Cherokee Nation is paying for this documentary. Flying, crews out to places to interview people, paying for makeup artists. The same Cherokee Nation that at one point wanted to deny the importance of this history. So this really gives me hope. This gives me hope that things can change in any domain. Yeah. It can take time and a lot of work, and sometimes people, do suffer. Yeah. And they experience extreme losses in the interim. But things can change.
I love that. And as you were talking, I was thinking about the way the historical truth led to a type of a reckoning, coming to terms with a reality that they were willing to acknowledge and move forward. And therefore, this idea that we can be healthier, right? This idea of whatever you see our country as being, I think a lot of haunted houses that, in many ways, it seems as though our country can seem haunted in ways. And it's interesting because among your scholarship, you've written about literal haunted plantations, and in your book, Tales from the Haunted South. So I wanted you to talk for a minute about ghost stories and ghost tours and their role in the South and their popularity. What have you come to understand about that?
Wow, that was such a smooth segue. I can't keep up with you, Tammy. I can't keep up. So, yes, I agree that a nation can feel like a house and that our nation can feel haunted or is haunted by our past. And I think the Cherokee Nation and other slaveholding indigenous nations have also been haunted by their past. And there are different things that one can do or a group can do when confronting a ghost. You could run and hide, or you could maybe say, you're here for a reason. Let's talk about it. And when ghosts appear, whether it's in somebody's imagination or somebody's novel, somebody's show, or some people feel that they really have interacted with ghosts, they enter into the present time and space from the past. So ghosts are all about history. And in the book that you mentioned, Tales from the Haunted South, that's what I contend with. I contend with how really every place in this country has had an explosion of ghost tours. And I look in particular at the South and the popularity of ghost tours in the South and consider what's going on with that. Mm-hmm. And if ghosts are always about the past, what is it that people are desiring or looking for or wanting to engage with when they conjure up a ghost in the South, or when they get a ticket for a ghost tour in the South? And what I wrote about in that book is, first of all, I was looking at the proliferation of these tours and their popularity. I was looking at why the South is viewed as being more haunted than any other place. And I was looking at how people who go on a ghost tour sometimes might seem as if they're just after frivolous fun, but actually they are seeking some kind of engagement with the past. And they're seeking it in a way that feels safe. And that desire, that historical desire, produces, all kinds of profit for people who are engaged in this commercially. And that's important. But there's something else happening psychologically, intellectually, emotionally that we can consider. And so in that book, when I try to get into that space of what is the impulse here? Why is it that all these tour companies can make a bunch of money selling the haunted South? What I arrived at was that there is a lingering sense of a deep evil, a deep wrong, moral transgression that's connected to the South in people's minds. And trying to ignore it hasn't worked. So people seek to engage it, to grapple with it in ways that they feel won't pull them in beyond their point of ability to manage it or to handle it. So they think, I'm going to go on a ghost tour. But they actually are recognizing somewhere, and maybe in an unspoken, unrealized way, that they need to contend with this past. So in the book, I profile different places that are selling this notion of a haunted South. I analyze and I critique these historic sites that basically invent or exaggerate the notion of slave ghosts, that is, Black enslaved people who are now ghosts who are hanging around the place. And I end up saying two things. One of those is that while I was skeptical of these ghost tours at the beginning, I came to realize at the end that they can serve a purpose. And they might be a way for public historians, public humanities professionals, for people to actually meet that interest in a constructive fashion. So if we can have a ghost tour that actually is respectful, that actually leaves space for considering some of these emotional issues, we might get somewhere. So that was one point that I arrived at. The second point I arrived at was that, and there are lots of people in southern cities and towns who are confronting the history of slavery, racial violence, sexual violence kind of head on, and they're not the ones who are selling the tickets. But by that I mean no one's signing up for their tours, as opposed to the walking tour in Charleston, where you hold a cup of beer while you go to the sites. So what can we do to support and emphasize and regard local Black history?
Oh, powerful. As you were saying that, I thought, I want to say it's tomorrow. There is and someone from the audience may have these details a little bit more clearly than I, but there's an organization in Jacksonville called 90 Forward, and they're having a committal service where they take the dirt from where a person was lynched in our county, and they put it in a jar, and it's taken to the museum of, someone help me, in Alabama. Yeah, in Montgomery. Yeah, and so they're having that committal. So as you were talking about that, I also thought about this the Billie Holiday song. I thought about the Southern Gothic in fiction, but I also thought about the Billie Holiday song "Southern Trees Bear Strange Fruit." And as I was thinking about that, I thought about there's a common theme throughout much of your work, and where you're exploring the role of nature and the environment. In the South, there is an association with, if you go to Savannah or any of these towns, you go on these tours, they're hanging trees, whipping trees. But in your writing, I think it's a powerful reclamation of Black women claiming natural spaces. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I think that my first realization of the importance of trees and the natural world, elements of the natural world, to enslaved people's experiences really came when I was making that transition between history and fiction that we were talking about earlier. I did a lot of research on the Chief Inn House State Historic Site, which is just north, right, in where's it, Chatsworth, Georgia. And I wrote a history on it, and I was trying to write a novel based on it. And when I went back to visit the site with a friend and colleague of mine, who's also a researcher in this area, with the fiction in mind, I had an experience. It was an imaginative experience, which to me was like a spark, a creative spark. And that was, I imagined one of the historical figures who I knew had lived on that plantation being on one of the trees, being up in one of the trees on the plantation, and trying to get the attention of myself and my friend and colleague. So I had to be careful when I tell the story because it's going to sound like I saw a ghost. I'm not saying I saw a ghost, you all, but I did have a vivid moment of imagining on that plantation site, seeing an Afro-Indigenous girl up in a tree trying to get my attention. And that was sort of a call, in a way, to pay attention to her story. One of those stories that would not be possible to write through straightforward history. So the tree was really, really important to that whole interaction with this fictive figure. And the trees, plural, were really important to the lives of the people on that plantation. There was another story from the same time period in my scholarship and writing from the same place that really struck me as well, which was there was an enslaved man on the Van Plantation who was just, his name was Isaac. He was so incredible. He was multi-talented. He was multilingual. He was also a musician. He was also really brave. He tried to escape, but he returned to try to bring his wife out of enslavement there, and that's when he was captured. And this is really sad, you all. But so he was murdered. He was hanged on this plantation, and I'd been there many, many times. And at some point, I just thought to ask the question of the guide with whom I had become close, do you think this is the tree where Isaac, would have lost his life? And she said, yes, it could have been. It would have been the right age. So that's when I began to recognize, you'll have to forgive me because sometimes these stories just take me to a different place. That's when I began to recognize that the trees are witnesses. The trees, the old trees, they were there. They saw what happened. They heard what happened. However it is that they sense the world as living beings, which they are. They were part of the story. And the people of the past had close relationships with them. That began my kind of recognition that the environment and lands had always been a part of my history. I just didn't see it in that way. And then I started to focus in on that. And now it's a much more obvious and a much larger aspect of the way that I think about the past and the ways that I write.
Well, I think this is the point where I'll interject. I think it's a wonderful connection because that actually was one of our audience questions to do with nature and your work. So thank you guys for such a wonderful conversation thus far. It's really very emotional. We are going to open it up to our audience questions. So they were all pre-submitted. So I have them already. So Tammy, I'll leave them to you.
All right. Question number 1. Is there a concise term for a formerly enslaved African in the U.S. before 1865 who took it upon themselves to abscond. For example, thousands of formerly enslaved who joined Sherman's march to the sea.
First of all, thank you for your questions, you all. We appreciate them. Short answer, no, I don't think so. I think it's very hard to arrive at precise terms. Language is always changing, and language is always ambiguous, and terms are argued about all the time. In the first part of that question, I might have responded to a fugitive slave, right? That was a term that had been used to describe somebody who absconded. But there are ways in which that term can be uncomfortable for people, or it can seem problematic for people, essentially because a fugitive suggests that somebody is breaking the law, which of course enslaved people who took their own lives back were breaking the law. But if the law was unjust, should we label their action primarily in accordance with their law breaking? And some people are very uncomfortable with the term slave now because they feel that it seems to categorize a person or a group of people based on one characteristic, which is an external characteristic, as opposed to thinking about people based on who they are from the inside. Another answer, because there was a second part to that question, might have been something like contraband of war, not very precise, and also very problematic.
How did you first come across this story or idea, Night Flyer? Was there a specific moment when you realized this is the one that I have to turn into a book?
For a long time before I wrote this book, I want to say even a decade, I was really interested in the role of the environment in the Underground Railroad. And I thought I might write a book on that topic. And I started collecting notes on that. So when I'd read a slave narrative, I kept files of notes on where does nature come up in this narrative. And nature came up all over the place, you all, just everywhere. Many years passed, I was still keeping those files. And I just had an opportunity that came my way, which was there was a new biography series that was being edited by Skip Gates, and it was focused on Black intellectual and artistic figures. But I had the chance to write for this, and I was thinking back to my desire to write something about nature and the Underground Railroad, and Harriet Tubman was prominent in my notes that I had for that idea. And so I proposed, how about Harriet Tubman, even though she's not often viewed as an intellectual or an artistic figure? And I got the green light. So it was basically an opportunity to be able to write on a topic that I had wanted to address in a little bit of a different form than I had initially conceived.
What is your favorite thing you learned about Harriet Tubman during your research?
My favorite thing. That's different than the most surprising thing. Okay. My favorite thing that I learned about Tubman during the research is that she had the courage to entertain mystery. And by that, I mean that she had a deep faith. She believed in a God who was personal and real to her. And she had the courage to just step into that and to live in that zone. This is something that I really admire. I'm not saying that I could do it or I necessarily want to do it, but I admire that. And I think it's what made it possible for her to be who she was, that she had this turn of mind connected with a psychological resilience that enabled her to go into all these dangerous situations and to just trust in the mystery, which to her was her God, and believe that she could carry these things off.
Beautiful. Okay. What do you hope your readers get from your work?
One of the things that first comes to mind, there are a few ideas that are arm wrestling in my head right now. But one of the things that first comes to mind is I hope that readers will not just see, because people already see this, but know and believe that things change. And I say that because I feel that we're living in very difficult times in a lot of domains. And it can be a self-protective reaction to kind of turn away from it. And we can lose hope because of it. In fact, I was just reading a book the other day, you all. Well, was it yesterday? Yeah, yesterday on the plane. I was reading a book which was talking about how, at the end, about how it seems like things will never change. That we've had a bad past, we're in a bad present, we're going to have a bad future. While I can appreciate the author's reason for feeling that way and thinking that way, I don't know that serves us necessarily well. And so I would want people to take from my work that things can change. They do change. Not just can, they do. Things do change. That is the nature of reality at bottom, at the very baseline level. Things change. That means this is all going to change. And we don't know how, and we can't guarantee it's going to change in the right direction. Oftentimes things change in the wrong direction. But the world as we know it today will not be the same world as we know it tomorrow. I can find hope in that. That means that there's a chance.
You research a lot into general history, the lives of historic figures. Have you ever done research into your own family history?
I have, but not in an in-depth way, but in an informal way for my own interests and my family's interests in particular. So I talked a lot with my grandmother about her family history. And when I was in graduate school, I finally, the light bulb went off that my grandmother's stories were actually history. And that's when I interviewed her and started taking notes and recording some of that. So I have that for, sometimes I look back at some things she said just because I want to feel close to her. I look forward to having that for my children. And my dad just turned 80, and he really wants to know about his family. He particularly felt this sense of being cut off. The way he put it was, I don't know who my people were, because he couldn't go back beyond his dad's parents. And this is the case for lots of Black people, that there's that wall, that genealogical wall, which is going to be coming down more and more as we have these archival projects that are scanning and making available tons of documents. But I decided to make that a gift for my dad, which was to research his family history, try to see if I could get past those two generations. And so at first I did it myself, but I'm not a genealogist. So then I hired the genealogist who helped me with all that she carried, and asked him if he would look into my dad's family. And we actually followed the same process that we did with all that she carried, which was for that book. I did the research, and then I hired a Charleston-based researcher to also do the research so that I could see if our findings matched or if there were places where they deviated, and that would raise more questions. And so we did the same thing with my dad's family line, and I was very happy to see that this professional genealogist's research did match my research. So now we can take my dad's family line back to the early 19th century in central South Carolina And we found some very interesting things out about the Mileses.
Interesting. Okay. What are books you found inspirational to your writing? Related question. What are some books you enjoy as a reader?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. So we touched on some of these books earlier in our conversation, Tammy. I fell in love with Alice Walker's writing probably when I was around 15, somewhere around there. And I have enjoyed all of her different kinds of writing, her fiction, her nonfiction. I actually think I enjoy her essays the most. Her poetry is beautiful. And going back and reading some of her older poems now is kind of startling to think about how she was recognizing the need that we kind of have to save ourselves. I think enjoy is not the word I want. I really appreciate reading Octavia Butler. Octavia Butler's writing terrifies me. I have had a hard time getting through all of her novels, and I think I've read almost all of them. I teach Kindred, which was published in, I think it was 79. Yeah, about slavery in Maryland. And that's always difficult to reread and to work through with the students. But my goodness, could Butler analyze the complexity of the human psyche? And she also had a lot of environmental writing, Tammy, that is not necessarily published. You can get some of it through her Parable series, but it's in her archives in the Huntington Library. And in her notebook, she talks all about the environment, and she seems to have realized what was coming, which is... So read Octavia Butler if you want a map, if you want a map to this moment. And I want to end with this answer with something positive, which is a book that I would really recommend that I really love about writing is Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird. I think the subtitle might be Instructions on Writing and Life. So it's a memoir and also a writing guide, a craft guide. It's so reassuring because it speaks to the reader from the position and the identity of a writer who struggles with writing. And it helps us to see that this is not going to be an exact quote, but that we really can get there to the end of our story or to the end of our book if we take the project, bit by bit or bird by bird, that we don't have to see the whole way. We just have to see that next step in front of us. It's a wonderful book, and I highly recommend it.
Thank you so much, Tiya. I feel blessed to have had this experience with you.
Oh, thank you so much, Tammy.